Hey guys, and welcome back to Morgs Menu. So most people, when they hear Maryland and associate it with food, they think crabs and Old Bay. That's kind of the normal thing that people associate with Maryland in general. But once I moved to Baltimore a couple of years ago, I realized there are a couple other things that are specific to kind of Maryland, but more so Baltimore, to include Natty Boh beer as well as a Baltimore Berger cookie. So if you don't know what a Berger cookie is, it's basically typically a pretty large in size, almost like cake-like, very soft cookie that then has a very chocolatey, fudgy icing on top. They're so good, super sweet. Typically they're so big and sweet I can't even eat a full one myself, but they are just delicious. And I came across a recipe the other day of how to make them at home. So let's go ahead and test it out and see how they turn out. Alright, so I'll briefly go over the ingredients and kind of tools that you're going to need for this recipe, and then I'll bring you in closer and we'll kind of go step by step on how this recipe says to pull everything together. So it's going to be a kind of 2 to 3 step process to make these cookies. So first, we're going to make the actual cookie layer. So for that, you're going to need some regular all-purpose flour, granulated or regular sugar, butter and an egg, baking powder and some salt, and lastly, some milk. And then for the icing, we're going to need some salt and vanilla extract, some confectioner sugar, not regular granulated sugar. And then these last 3 items, I'm swaying slightly from the original recipe, but it's based on comments that I read and some substitutions that I'm making. So to start off, I realized once I pulled all of my ingredients out, I don't actually have any heavy cream like I thought I did in the fridge. So we're just going to be using milk. I may just use slightly less milk just so it doesn't make the texture wrong. I think it'll be okay, but definitely probably try and use some heavy cream so it'll be a little bit creamier of a texture, but we gotta work with what we got. The recipe also calls for some corn syrup in the icing. Now, I wasn't gonna go buy a big thing of corn syrup just for this recipe, but it did say you can substitute it with maple syrup, which I have here. And then the final little swap I'm going to be doing is for the chocolate chips. So I got milk chocolate chips, where the normal recipe calls for semi-sweet chocolate chips. I read in a lot of the comments that people said that the recipe was really good, but they were missing the sweetness in the icing, and so they would recommend to use milk chocolate versus semi-sweet chocolate chips to kind of give it that more fudgy, rich texture that they're looking for. So I figured I'd try that out. Now, aside from the ingredients, you're kind of just going to need some basic baking things. So you'll want 2 big baking sheets and some parchment paper, a random assortment of measuring cups and spoons, a large mixing bowl and spoon, another big kind of measuring cup or large bowl that's microwave friendly, and then some beaters to mix everything together. So now that we've got everything pulled out, let's go ahead and start making the cookies. Alright, so we've got all of our stuff here for the cookie mixture. So the first thing you're actually going to want to do is preheat your oven to 400 degrees. So once your oven is preheating, you're going to go ahead and start by mixing together our butter, salt, vanilla extract, and baking powder. For the butter, you're going to want to make sure it is softened, and we need 5 1/3 tablespoons added into our large mixing bowl. A 1/2 teaspoon of salt, a full teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a teaspoon of baking powder. And now we're just going to beat all this together. Now we're going to add in our egg and 1/2 cup of sugar. Alright, and now we're going to switch away from the beater and switch to a spoon. And we're going to add in our flour and our milk. So we're going to need 1 1/2 cups of flour and 1/3 cup of milk. It says to add both in, kind of alternating, starting and ending with the flour, mix it together just in pieces. So we're going to go ahead and do that and then stir with our large spoon until it's all combined. All right, so now we've got our dough mixture ready to go. So we're gonna go ahead and line 2 large baking sheets with our parchment paper. Now we're gonna take a large tablespoon and go ahead and divvy out our dough into balls, spacing them about 2 inches apart to make about 16 to 20 cookies. Alright, so we're now going to bake these for about 10 to 12 minutes in the oven. These are supposed to be a very soft, like I said, cake-like cookie, so you want to take them out before they start browning on the top. They should brown on the bottom, so you can kind of test and look under one really carefully. And once the edges are starting to brown just a little bit, you want to take them out, and then we're actually going to let them cool directly on the pan so that the bottoms get fully kind of cooked and a little bit crunchy, but the cookie in the middle and everything remains pretty soft. Alright, so here are our cookies out of the oven. As you can see, this pan, they started to get a little brown on the edges, so I went ahead and pulled them out. That was the pan that was on the top, and then this one actually turned out much better. It's not quite as brown, so these will probably be a bit softer, but I also forgot to note that before you actually put these in the oven, you want to smash the dough down either with your fingers, a spoon, a knife, whatever, to get them more flat so they bake as flat cookies because you're going to be icing them. So I realized that I skipped this step like 2 minutes into baking them, so I pulled them out and just mashed them down, but definitely try and do that before you put them in and don't be like me. Alright, so now we're going to work on the frosting while those are cooling. So basically you want to take the 2 cups or basically the full bag of chocolate chips, put it in a either microwave safe bowl or you can melt the chocolate in a saute pan. I'm just going to microwave it, and you want to add in both the vanilla extract, which you're going to need a teaspoon of, and then you're going to need your heavy cream or milk, which is what I'm going to be using, and for that you're going to need 3/4 of a cup. Alright, and so since I'm melting mine in the microwave, I'm just going to do it in increments of like 30 seconds until it starts to melt, and then we'll stir it all together to get it all combined. Alright, so that only took like a minute for me, so I'm going to go ahead and stir it all together. Alright, so now we're just going to add our remaining ingredients in. And because I used milk instead of heavy cream, I may end up adding a little extra sugar. It says 1.5 cups, but we will see how this texture is and if I feel like it's thick enough with the amount of sugar that it calls for. Alright, so here's our icing already. So basically I'm going to let it sit for a couple more minutes, let it kind of set up. It says it does thicken kind of with time as it cools off. So we're going to wait just a couple more minutes for this to cool off a little bit and the cookies to cool for just a couple more minutes, and then we'll start icing them. Alright, so now everything has cooled off a bit, so I moved all the cookies to this one baking sheet. So first step we're going to do is basically take each cookie, dip it directly into this chocolate here. Bring it up like that. You want to make sure you get a lot of it on there. I'm just going to dip again. Kind of like that. Do that for all of them, and then once this starts to set, you're going to want to let it cool again. Once it starts to get thickened and this is kind of starting to set, you're going to take the remaining chocolate sauce and icing and put it on with a knife. as you can see, I basically just repeated this step over and over again a couple of times until all the icing was done. As you saw, my icing was a little bit runny again, probably because of the use of milk instead of heavy cream. So definitely try and use heavy cream if you try out this recipe. But overall, this tasted so good, just like a burger cookie in my opinion. It was a little bit thicker of a cookie than I would have liked, but again, if I had remembered to smash the dough down before I actually put it in the oven, I think it would have been a slightly bigger cookie and slightly thinner cookie, because really you almost want the same amount of icing as you do cookie. It's a very thick icing. I'll show a picture of kind of how these turned out. It still tasted really good. I think the use of the milk chocolate was a really good idea as well. It was super sweet, just like the normal cookie. So definitely recommend these, and it really wasn't too difficult of a recipe. Just kind of took some time because you did have to wait a little bit of time in between each layer of icing because mine was pretty runny. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. As I mentioned, all of the steps and everything, ingredients I followed exactly in the recipe, linked in the description box down below. If you're new to my channel, make sure you go ahead and follow me on Instagram for more content throughout the week, and make sure you go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the videos that I post on Wednesdays and Sundays. Thanks again for watching Morgs Menu, and I hope you have a great day. Bye guys.